Today's story starts with a visit to a museum in Brussels, a military museum. Between galleries full of all kinds of warfare objects and machinery, from old armors to sleek aircrafts, there was something else that called the attention of Dr. Jia Hui Lee. That day, they were featuring a project about rats. Rats use it to defuse explosives.
So what I found really interesting when I was visiting the museum and learned about this project, I was quite curious about how a project that trains rats to detect landmines, what's the history of this project appearing in an Imperial War Museum in Brussels. So that was the beginning of the questions, and I did some research.
For Jia, that was the beginning of a long journey that took him from Brussels to Morogoro, Tanzania, to research about a very particular project in animal-human interaction. Greetings, my friend, and welcome to It's Not a Monster, on defense of the misunderstood, the despised, the vilified, or just the ugly ones. I am David Andres Kinch. Today we're going to talk about rats, a thought-casing rejection. I will say that it's one of the four horsemen of despicable animals. And it's justified, no? Their association with the dirtiness is so strong that back in the 17th century, even scientists as Jean-Baptiste van Helmont used to believe that these kinds of creatures emerged spontaneously from the spoiled wheat. They also seem aggressive. They bite, they even caused the Black Death in the medieval Europe, right? Not exactly. We're going to revisit each of these points, but I'm not going to do it alone.
Hi everyone, my name is Jia Hui Lee. I'm currently a junior professor of Science and Technology Studies at the University of Bayreuth. And what I work on are different kinds of human-rodent relationships, mostly in East Africa. So I look at how people relate with rats and mice and other rodents as well in the context of farming, for example, or agricultural projects.
Jia Hui has worked in these interspecies interactions in a lot of different contexts, but today we're going to talk mostly about his experience with a project of an NGO called APOPO, which consists in training giant poached rats in Tanzania for a very special task. But wait, before we talk about that, there is a basic question that we need to answer. What is a rat?
So that's a very interesting question, and there's an essay written by Umberto Eco describes the difficulty of whether something is a rat or a mouse.
The essay is called Mouse or Rat? Translation as Negotiation, if you want to check it out.
And so even if you sort of think about different languages that one may be familiar with, you get different ideas of how big a rat is, and then at what size does it then become a mouse.
Rata, sugi, mouse are all categories that have different meanings. For example, for the case of Tanzania, which is the country that is going to centralize most of today's narration.
So in Kiswahili, there isn't a real differentiation between mice or mouse and rat. So all of the different mice and rats are called panya. And panya really describes these kinds of animals that have habits of gnawing, so sort of using their two front teeth to slowly gnaw on surfaces or food.
As you can see, there is no an exact equivalent between what people might understand as a rat and a specific taxonomic category, so I'm going to use the broadest categorization possible, which kind of fit the definition of Pania, the order Rodentia. With more than 1,500 species, this is the second largest group of mammals. You can recognize them by their single pair of incisors in each jaw, different than rabbits that have two pairs. They live in all continents except Antarctica, and they are very diverse. From the tiny kangaroo rats with reflex faster than blink to the giant pig-sized capybara grazing in the big plains of South America, including flying squirrels able to glide between the trees and highly complex societies of naked mole rats. One of the things that makes them so special is their smell sense.
So this is a good way to start talking about rat senses and how they smell particularly is to refer to the animated film Ratatouille.
In this movie, we follow the story of Remy, a young French rat passionate about cooking. He gradually starts experimenting with different types of food and ingredients.
And if you combine mushrooms and cheese and tomato, you create this new tastefully revealing experience.
And after some time, thanks to his skills and very well trained smell and taste sense, he becomes a top-notch chef.
So the part of the movie that's actually quite accurate is that smell is really one of the most powerful senses that rats and other rodents have. And this has also been shown by various studies where rats can find their way through the recognition of odors and smells in a certain area. They can also, for example, smell each other's breath after one of them have eaten a certain kind of food, and they would be able to know or gather information about the kinds of food that was eaten based on the breath that they can smell on another fellow rat.
They can use this information to follow the trail of a very good food source, or even for the complete opposite.
There is also a discussion at some point about how rat poisons don't actually work, because what happens is that when a rat consumes poison and becomes very ill and maybe dies, another fellow rat that smells its breath is able to identify that perhaps whatever was eaten by this rat, which contains the smell of this poison, would also cause this other rat to become sick and die. You can see how, unlike humans, which I think we are very much visual and maybe audio creatures, with rats, the world probably, and I'm using visual language, right? The world probably appears or smells in different textures. To imagine being a rat is to inhabit a world that has colors, textures, sounds that can all be smelled rather than just sensed in those other ways. And of course, rats do see, but they're not very good seers. They hear, and they're probably quite good hearers. And they can also feel vibrations, but smell is really how they navigate the world.
This smelling superpower allows them to detect even things that you wouldn't expect. War always left scars, in the souls, in the bodies, and in the land itself. Even after the guns get silenced and the war machines leave, beneath the earth frequently remains landmines and other unexploded artifacts that are way more difficult to remove. And the thing is that this doesn't occur in distant, isolated spaces, but very close to human settlements. Places that once were daily used by the local communities remains inaccessible even after the war. Traditionally, metal detectors are used to clean these areas, but in an old battlefield, distinguish between a bomb and simple scrap might be like looking for a needle in a haystack, unless you can detect the explosive chemicals themselves. And before you get any worry, no, the rat does not blow up. They are too light to activate explosives. Instead, they are trained to detect the smell of TNT and tell their human counterparts when they found something. Like those airport ducks, but way cheaper and easier to train. And here is where we come back to talk about the APOPO project and the research of Jia Hui following this project.
So initially the project started with lab rats, but they soon found out that this endemic species of rats in East Africa and also parts of Central and West Africa, the giant pouch rat, so Chrysotomys gambianus or Chrysotomys ansauge, are very good at being trained and developing a kind of social relationship with the trainers.
However, people are not so willing to see rodents in the same way than dogs.
So when I was describing my project to different people at the early stages of this research, most people were quite shocked or slightly disgusted. And even people in Tanzania who I talked to when I first arrived and very surprised at how people could train or work with rats to do this kind of work.
One of the main worries of the locals was about rodents chewing on their belongings or biting their children. And here is where I have to ask to Jia Hui, do they bite?
Definitely. Rats bite, and so do mice.
As I told you before, great part of the identity of rodents is related with their teeth. I even would say that this is their second superpower.
The teeth that they have are very strong, right? So a lot of rodent teeth can chew through wood. It can sometimes chew through cement. It definitely chews through the plastic dustbins.
Their incisors have a thick enamel layer, but just in the frontal part. This makes that each time that they grind their teeth against each other, they remain sharp as an excellent chisel, able to carve through anything. They also grow during all their life, and that's why they need to gnaw and chew on stuff constantly to keep them from growing too much. But then why they do it on people, you might say?
One story that I've heard a few times now is that if you eat with your hands, right, and you're not careful about properly washing your hands, and you can wash your hands well with soap and everything, but if you don't wash it to the extent that you wash away the smell of the food, sometimes rats can smell these lingering traces of what you've eaten as a human, and they would start to nibble on your finger if it smells like the food you've eaten.
But sometimes, even if you are not smelling like food,
rats are not just one and the same creatures, right? Different rats have different things that they like, different ways of doing things, different moods, sometimes different, I don't know if I would use the word personality.
Rodents can also have a bad day. And can you judge them? You would also bite an annoying human in a moody day. But don't worry, that doesn't mean that they are going to eat you because they are angry and you smell like cheese. As Jia Hui told me, even if you are very unlucky and they bite you, with your reaction they are just going to freak out and run away. But for most of the people which do not work with them, it's very unlikely engage with rodents in a context that they are prone to bite. But let's say that they decided to visit you at home. First, Do not put your Dorito smelling fingers close to them. And second, do not corner them.
If you do corner a rat and it feels like it cannot escape, it sometimes as a self-defense mechanism will jump and bite you. And so that's also one way of getting bitten by a rat. But it has to feel very cornered because of how fast and how agile and how well they know where to run to and which corner to escape to. Usually jumping and biting is happens very rarely, and it's like the last resort.
Instead of that, or even try the pointless attempt to kill them, trying to create a corridor that leads to the exit. They are smart. They are not going to fight you when they can escape. So the final lesson sounds a little bit like the moral of a fable for kids. If you don't want that a rat bite you, do not be mean with them and wash your hands. But even besides this, there is other reasons of why Tanzanians do not like pania that much. In the second part of this episode, we're going to explore other challenges in this complicated relationship between rats and humans. How rats are innocent from some false accusations that we have put on them, and how their intellect makes them surprisingly more similar to us than we might expect. You can find reference and extra material at the description of this episode. This episode was produced by me, David Quinche Giraldo, and with the collaboration of our interviewee, Dr. Jia Hui Lee. Thanks for listening and see you next time.